One thing that we were keen to talk about was COVID-19 and the impact of that on a bunch of different things.
Sure.
One thing that I'm interested to know to start with, because we know that you guys have invested in 3 startups since COVID-19 without meeting people face to face. But
Yes.
One other thing that we were talking to some of the other VCs about was how many investments you target to make over the course of 12 months and whether that number has changed or reduced because of COVID-19.
So I think, I mean, this is very much like the Seedcamp answer, and I don't think it's relevant that much for like the other funds.
Yeah.
But in our case, you know, even when we are like pitching ourselves to the LPs, to the investors that would invest in funds like us, we think that one of the key like attributes of our model is around diversification, and diversification also comes around like time diversification. And what I mean by time diversification is that we are going to, over a 3 years period where we do our initial investments, maintain the cadence at which we invest. And because we are doing so over a 3-year period, we might like just like invest throughout different economic cycles. And we think that kind of like diversification you get across the portfolio allows us to have exposure to a lot of like different dynamics. So from our side, you know, we build like every 3 years, there's like portfolio of like 100 to 110 companies, which means like approximately like 35 investments per year. And we are very much looking at keeping this pace of investment over the next few months. But I know this is quite unique from like some of the conversations I've been having with my peers in the industry.
Yeah. And if you notice, in order to kind of keep up the momentum, like you say, and stick to those kinds of numbers, have you experienced, or have you noticed like a spike in deal flow, the amount of companies that are approaching you, or does that all seem to be the same as it would have been before?
We haven't seen a spike. I think on our pre-seed deal flow, where, as I mentioned before, there are like the first point of contact is like literally like filling the form that is on our website. We're quite happy to see that the numbers, like in terms of like number of submissions, stayed pretty much the same. So there, it's like kind of like pretty much like as usual. I think on our seed deal flow, where we are investing alongside other funds in those like bigger rounds of like 1 to like 2.5 million, there we've seen a bit of a slowdown. I think some of the entrepreneurs that are maybe raising those amounts like have decided to take a step back and maybe like go out raise 2-3 months later. So it's been a bit slower, but to be honest, even on that front, over the past 10 days, we start to see a bit more activity. So we are hopeful that also on that front, our deal flow will not be too much impacted by the current situation.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about these 3 that you invested in, and like kind of the process and what happened? So was it the pre-seed fund? Did they get in touch via the form? Like, what was the process from the initial point to no face-to-face meetings and you investing?
Yeah. So, I mean, unfortunately, I can't like disclose the name of those companies because they're still stealth, etc. But yeah, those were like 3 companies that came through our pre-seed process. And so just for a bit of additional context there, basically the way we operate at pre-seed is that we have this very like structured process that we run 6 times a year, where basically 6 times a year we would like take investment decision. And so we took investment decision just like 2-3 weeks ago regarding those companies. And that has been actually working quite smoothly for us, because basically a lot of that process actually already in pre-COVID time happens online. And then we have the final stage of that process that would happen in person in our office, where we have like the companies coming and like spending more time pitching to us over like 1-hour sessions. And then they also get actually an opportunity for like the ones like we are the most interested in. So imagine like the kind of like 10-15 companies out of the previous 2 months that we thought were the most interesting. Those ones also get an opportunity to present what they work on to our investor base. And as I mentioned before, often those folks would be interested in syndicating deals with us. And it's quite interesting because among our investors, we have very active entrepreneur turned angel investors, but also larger funds that usually would rather come in at Series A and beyond, like Index Ventures, Atomico, etc. And so it's usually a great way to put those companies under the radar of some really smart investors. And so what happens is that right now we are obviously like forced to like run that process online, but it worked quite well. So we had our like kind of partner pitch with like the companies just like on the Wednesday first day, and on the Friday we had like this kind of we used like Zoom webinar, and we had like every company just presenting what they work on. It's usually a shorter pitch format. Unfortunately, you lose a bit of like the kind of like networking opportunity that happens when we do that in our office, which is a bit of a pity, but it still worked quite nicely. And actually, interestingly, as we have a lot of investors in our fund that are not based in the UK, it enabled those guys to also join the session. And sometimes when we do it in person, like some of them would travel, but for a lot of them, they can't like travel 6 times a year in London. So actually it worked quite well, that process for us. Yeah. I think what we try to do is, given that it's a bit more difficult obviously to get a sense for the people when you're like running the entire process remotely, is to like have like maybe like the chance to like check in with like people they used to work with, etc. Right? Like have just like a bit more of a feel for like the way they usually work, and like who they are, by also interacting with other people that know them well. So that has been helpful. But to be honest, for our pre-seed process, it's been pretty smooth, I would say. And we are just now like heads down looking at a lot of companies for our next decision point in 10 days. And we are confident we will again have some really good companies that we can look at that point.
Yeah. And I can kind of guess what your answer is going to be to the next question, but what advice would you have for founders that are looking to raise at the moment?
I think, I mean, just to like moving a bit away from like the kind of like very Seedcamp specific advice, which is like, we are very much open to for business and like keen to look at a lot of like different opportunities. I think that there's a bit of a flight to the obvious from like the VCs. So if you think about like the different like sectors, etc., obviously if you're like a startup working around like enterprise collaboration or kind of enabling like anything that benefits from like this remote work trend, I mean, you're in a great position because there's like actually tons of capital that has been raised that needs to be deployed, and those companies are obvious winners of the current situation. So that works quite nicely for you. If you are in a space that is like really suffering a lot from like the whole current context, if you're in hospitality, travel, etc., it's definitely much trickier. And then I think there is a bit of a question of, can you potentially even like postpone a bit your fundraise and not go out and raise right now? Because I think right now there's so much uncertainty even on like the duration of this whole crisis, when like we'll get back to normal, and what even like back to normal means for industries like travel, hospitality, etc. That, I mean, investors are quite cautious. If you're a bit in between, in the middle, where it's kind of unclear for you, it's about like very much, I think, showing, and that's also relevant actually if you are in a sector that is like clearly impacted by the current situation, how like basically you can do like very creative things that actually 6 months from now would potentially position you in an even stronger place than where you would have been without this whole crisis. And I know that sounds like a bit difficult, but we have companies in our portfolio that are, for example, in the travel space, who are like right now in like a situation, and obviously they're quite early stage businesses, for some of them even like pre-launch, so it works quite nicely for them. But where, for example, if you imagine you're a marketplace and you had to like secure like a lot of like that supply for the marketplace, actually securing that supply has never been as easy as today. I mean, like you can build like partnerships also with like large companies in your industry that potentially were not like looking at like partnering with such an early stage business, and now would much more be open for those opportunities because they are looking for anything that would basically allow them to like add some additional revenue, etc. And because like their core activity just like kind of slowed down, they are open for those discussions. So it's about how you can potentially also even a bit tweak your product, your offering, and really like kind of like try to take advantage of like some of like the current dynamics that are right now at play.
Yeah. And one other thing that you mentioned was that you've got other investors that you work with. So there's some entrepreneurs who have become angel investors and some other VCs. Do you have any advice for investors? I'm mostly interested in kind of angel investors that might be watching this back, in terms of holding off on investing or going ahead with investments or anything on that side.
Yeah, I mean, I think, on that front, and that's very much the Seedcamp view, is that in times like that, you have like some incredible companies that get started. And we actually already now, I had like this week, my first conversations with people who made the jump to like the startup world, or like to like launching a business, just like over the past few weeks. For some of them, they might still be a tiny bit early for us. For others, actually not, because they've been able to work extremely efficiently over the past like 6-8 weeks, and we might already consider them now for investment. And I think there are like incredible companies that are going to be built over the next few months. There are like some great talents that were maybe for a long time like hesitating between like just like continuing with like their like old job or like making the jump to launching their business, who are like now going to do it, and they will be also able to do so with like kind of taking into consideration a bit of this kind of like new paradigm and like a lot of like those new trends, etc. So I think if you are an angel investor, especially on investing very early, it's actually a great time to like be able to really invest in companies that will have like the potential like few years down the line to potentially like really drastically impact the way we live and operate and work, etc.
And final question from me. You were talking about meeting companies virtually, and then also kind of doing a bit of, I guess, character research from other people that they've worked with and that kind of thing. If there's a lot of founders who are doing virtual meetings at the moment with various different investors, do you have any tips in terms of what you would like to see as an investor when you're doing a virtual meeting, or something that would help them stand out, or something that is missing when you would see them virtually versus in person that they can kind of help make up for in some way?
Yeah, I think there are obviously a few limitations of like doing pitches over Zoom, but it's really, really helpful if you come prepared, and that's actually also true for the investor. But like if you start the conversation and you already had a chance to look at the material, so the material was shared ahead of the call, and very much in the first few minutes of the call, you set up a bit of a plan of like what you want to cover. And often like the investor also would like tell you, okay, those are like the things we want to dig into. But I think that's really helpful, because also sometimes when you're having that like pitch over a call, like it's just easy to like get dragged in one direction and just realize, oh, like we haven't had the chance over that half an hour or 45 minutes pitch to cover like actually a lot of like really exciting areas of the business. So I think that's important, like a kind of like additional structure a bit you bring in this process. And then I think especially if you're very early stages, it's about also being yourself, being human. It's more difficult for the investors to judge a bit like the characters. And I mean, actually like the people are so important when you invest that early. So, be yourself, like maybe also be careful sometimes if like the co-founders are not in the same location when they do the call, the kind of ping pong between like the different founders, it cannot be sometimes as smooth as it would be in real life. So I think those are small things to be cautious with, because sometimes, investors would even read into like that founder interrupted the other, etc. So be careful with those things. And then I think also make sure, at the end of the call to wrap up with a kind of impactful, like kind of like wrap up of like making sure like the 2-3 takeaways you want like the investor to like get out of the call are very clearly stated by you at the end of the call as a kind of mini recap. I think those are some of like the kind of pretty obvious advice I can give for founders like that go through that process now.
Because when we do our investor coffee mornings, so we run investor coffee mornings every week, and we only give the founder 20 minutes to chat to the investor, because it's just an initial conversation at this point. And everyone chooses to use that 20 minutes differently, and some people send their deck in advance, and some people will spend the whole 20 minutes going through the deck, and it's just like, how do you make it as worthwhile as possible, and securing second meetings and that kind of stuff. So it's just useful to know what you would like to see.
Definitely.
It makes complete sense to just like figure out someone's personality, because you can lose a bit of your personality, I think. Firstly, when you're approaching investors to begin with, because you're like intimidated or you want it to go so well. Also with the like extra screen with a video call, it tends to be a bit more robotic. So that's really
definitely
good.
Another thing that we've done like towards like the final stages of our pre-seed process, for example, is that with all our portfolio companies, we set up Telegram groups. So we use Telegram. Don't ask me why. We don't use WhatsApp. We are on Telegram at Seedcamp, and we do that usually post investments, and that's basically our way to always be available to the founders and be able to help them with any challenges they have at any point of the day or the week. And we've done that actually already pre-investment this time. So when we were like kind of at that stage where we had like 10, 15 companies, we already done that with them, because it was also just a way to like kind of have a more active dialogue with them than what we just have over the calls or email. And actually, it's even to some extent helped a bit in like kind of feeling you were building a bit more of a rapport with the founders early on. So for us, it's been helpful.
Yeah, cool. And to finish off, I mean, with the pre-seed stuff, you said if people want to get in touch with you, it's via the form on your website, right?
Yeah, that's very much it. So at any point in time, you can just like submit your replies to that form, and basically on our side, yes, it's 6 times a year that we take actual investment decisions, but we are like taking calls and like just like providing feedback to those companies on a more kind of ongoing basis.
Yeah, and if you're looking for seed investment, is it the same approach or?
So for seed investments, there I would say it's more like kind of referral driven. So actually, we do also less seed deals per year. So out of like the 45 deals we do, there will be like 25 deals that are like pre-seed, and maybe 10, 12 deals max that are seed. Yeah. And on those deals, because we're not in the driving seat, often it's actually the lead investor that would like introduce us to the company, or it will be a founder that we might know from before, or like kind of has been referred by one of the founders we've already backed, or someone from our community, and we would like kind of engage with them early in their fundraising, knowing that we can only potentially commit to the deal once we have visibility on the actual round and like who is the lead, etc.
No, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you so much. That was really useful.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. That was a lot of fun.